Good morning. I'm going to have an interesting session because I've had the advantage of listening to previous speakers, and my task is to talk about the value of building control, and I'm going to do that in the context of what we do in England and Wales. And I just need to remind you that in England and Wales we've had competition for nearly 30 years. So what I'm going to try and do is to pick up some ideas that you've had from other speakers, because I've had the advantage of listening to lots of clever people who know a lot about what they're doing. However, I just want to point out that there is a paradox in the topic of the value of building control, because fundamentally, how do you measure what doesn't happen? So, one of my favourite statements about the value of building control comes from the Consortium of European Building Control. And they've got a booklet about the value of building control, and it just says that the benefits of building control are obvious after disasters. And the point being that when you do get things go wrong in buildings, it's important that people gain sufficient time to escape, and that the structure or fire damage is actually contained. And these are some recent examples from England and Wales. You always see them on the news. But in each case, people were protected, people were enabled to get out. I think, when you get dramatic events happening, having buildings working to protect the inhabitants is really important and not often understood. And of course, it doesn't only apply to new buildings. The previous presentation was as much about the existing building stock as about new buildings. And of course, building control in England and Wales applies to existing buildings, but it can go wrong. Sadly, this was an example in London where 6 people lost their lives in a fire. And if you want to know how the public sector and how local authorities can really get things wrong, then I suggest that you Google the Lacknall House coroner's report. What went on here, I'm not going to dwell on it, but it is about the value of building control. What went on here is that various contractors, various management teams were commissioning and implementing changes in a complex building that they didn't understand. No surveyors had been involved. It hadn't been put into building control. Materials were taken out and replaced with materials that weren't fire resistant. Changes were made in structures. Nobody knew what they were doing. But you need to go and have a look at the coroner's reports, and it will explain how things can go wrong. Obviously, the value to those families where they lost members, where people lost their lives, how do you measure that? But back to the paradox. It's not all about the big dramatic stuff. We need buildings to perform. There's a professional system that helps to deliver that. And in England and Wales, 2 years ago, we commissioned some research to understand exactly what we do in building control. And we had 70% of all surveyors, and interestingly, that wasn't just in the public sector, but that was in the private sector as well. So 70% of all surveyors for 1 month actually recorded what they did day to day. And when we tallied it up and we did the maths, we found that 5 million interventions are made annually. And those interventions include all the feedback that we give on plans, because it's the plan feedback that stops a lot of things going into construction. Even when construction is happening, we provide advice on site, and of course you've got constant conversations going on by email and by telephone as well. But 5 million interventions is a staggering number, but it's not obvious to industry, and it's not obvious to local authorities, and it's not obvious to our customers just how much effort is going into building control. And then interestingly, out of those interventions, it's not all about bureaucracy and red tape. 60-70%, more than 2/3, related to either moderate risks, moderate or serious risks that would come to light either immediately or not long into the future. Right, so those interventions are important. If you just look at this table, it breaks down the nature of those interventions. Now, structure, fire, energy, they all come out, and it's interesting that energy is right up there at the top, because it's been a criticism of building control from industry that actually we don't get involved in some of those things that don't save lives. But if you think about what we're doing, again, and think about what compliance actually means in real life, buildings have to work, and if you want them to work, you've got to be looking at all of those details. And how does that come through as economic value? Well, in good schools, your children learn more. In good hospitals, your relatives will get better. They'll get well more speedily. In good office and good factories, we work more productively. In good homes, as our previous speaker was explaining, we live healthier and happier lives. All right, so building research shows that all of these things have an economic and monetary value, right? But a lot of that value, a lot of those benefits, unfortunately, don't get attributed to building control. Everybody else kind of takes the credit, but those are the interventions that we're making to deliver that. So if we get down to money, is building control an expensive thing? Well, I think not. This is just a snapshot. Now these are LABC figures. It's just a snapshot of high volume house building in England, and you can look at the figures there. So building control, if you look at the formal compliance, so building control, all the various tests that we have to do on acoustic, performance and air pressure testing, the total cost of that in high volume house building comes to less than £400 per unit. Right, that is not a lot of money. Even when you add in the warranty, and of course the warranty is only really concerned with structural integrity and structural claims, the cost of that is much more actually than the building control compliance. So if you look at it for a total building, there's £357 being spent on formal compliance. And with the warranty added, in terms of that total kind of quality check that's going in, it's only just over £1,000. But local authorities are delivering a lot for not very much money. Now, in the big picture, what do we think about that? Well, if you just take the formal compliance bit, the building control part, it's coming to a fraction of a percentage on the cost of a new home. From focus groups, focus group research that we do with consumers, they really don't mind that fraction of a cost going on the building. In fact, they think more is actually being spent on looking after quality. Nobody's complaining at that kind of economic value. All right, but for the most part, our customers are actually businesses. So essentially, building control is a business-to-business service. So what do they think as customers? Well, interestingly, and again, this is not LABC research. We commissioned research that we did with a professional market research company. And they measured what customers expect. And 92% of business customers believe that they benefit from an independent, impartial third-party inspection service. 93% of customers, and these are by and large business customers, they believe that it's important that the building industry should use independent checks rather than self-certification. And even if you explore the idea of self-certification with businesses, 80% of them still say that in their own business they'd rather have a third-party assessment than them doing their own self-certification. Right, so when you explore these issues with business, you don't get the answers that sometimes people say that you would get. And if you extend that, why do they feel that? Well, 94% of architects and builders feel that building control reassures their clients, in other words, the end customer. And they're reassured that the job is being carried out properly and professionally. Right, so that's got a value to them in their onward marketing. And if you look at the end consumers, if you look at the public, in any case, mostly they believe that it is the council in any case that has responsibility for consumer protection. And they think that the local authorities are doing that job in any case. So, is everything perfect? No, can't pretend it is. When it comes to energy conservation, when it comes to energy performance, as Duncan was saying, you know, actually the process of putting together high performance houses and high performance buildings is actually a very complicated job. And building control is having to learn, along with the rest of industry, how to get it right. It's not fair, really, to blame building control because buildings don't perform to their targeted or their design standard. Actually, there's so many complexities in the way that buildings are put together that we've got to keep going back as a whole industry to criticising what's going on, understanding where it's going wrong, and then improving everything that's necessary to make it right. Something else that's imperfect, I mean, in England and Wales, we have very, very fierce competition. And I like many of my colleagues who work for approved inspectors. I've got professional relationships with people at NHBC, but when it comes to winning business, we're in a bitter, bitter fight. And the recession has done, or the recession did nothing to improve that. Is that helping the industry? I think not. We've done our own research at LABC, and we've got evidence now that there is definitely a downward spiral because of competition, and that developers, particularly larger companies, are exploiting competition to procure minimum interference in compliance terms at the lowest cost. And that means that people like NHBC and ourselves and independent approved inspectors, we are bargaining with our customers to say, we'll do it for less. Now, you can only go so far in doing that before you're starting to cut corners, and there's a lot of warning signs that we're getting now in England and Wales that we've allowed competition to go too far, and that now standards are starting to suffer. That competition also has a different kind of impact as well. Because we're competing, we're having to look at our costs. And because of the recession, we were looking at people costs. Right, so the industry now, the building control industry, the profession of building control, has now got a big problem in England and Wales because nobody has been taking on trainees, nobody has been investing in recruitment and in training. Right, so as we come out of recession, and there's very, very strong signs now that we are properly out of recession, this is going to become a major problem. Because as the industry comes back, we're not going to have the new generation of surveyors coming through. Right? They're already missing. So we've got a generational gap in our business. Right? So that's going to have some kind of economic cost, and nobody's quite sure yet how to resolve that. Right, so I've listened to a lot of people that have, people over yesterday and today that have got a lot of professional knowledge, and you've had warnings. Robin's presentation was full of warnings. Not all of the faults are actually big things that are going to kill people, but they've got a very high economic cost. And so, I've got a chance now. I'm standing up here. I've got the microphone. I'd say to you, especially councillors, especially elected members, you need to understand what building control is doing. It is a kind of Cinderella service. It's full of surveyors, technical people who really love doing the job, but they don't make these points about the value of building control very clear. And I think what I'd say to elected members is you've got to pull up senior managers and chief execs and the politicians who are directing change in local government. Yes, we know there's going to be change in local government. And yes, we know that the bankers blew away £15 trillion worth of value out of our economy. Right? But what we do in building control is something that's got a very, very long-term impact. The buildings that we work on are going to be there and they're going to be operating when we are dead and gone. So our inheritance is going to be there for many, many years and generations to come. So buildings outlast people, and I think you need to focus on this. And so my advice to you is you've got a really good system. Be careful you don't break it.